Kate, is Kate here? Yeah, she. Okay, we can start. Yeah, 20. Letter talk. Well, not yet. Start the meeting. Okay, I will call the meeting to order, the September 13th, 2023 meeting of the Southborough Personnel Board to order. First order of business is approval of the minutes of August 9th, which are circulated in advance of the meeting. Any corrections or changes to the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion? Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Second. All in favor, a roll call vote. Mr. Thorburn. Aye. Mr. Malinowski.
Aye.
Ms. Jones Johnson. Michelle, you're on mute. There you go.
Sorry about that. Good morning.
Are you voting in favor?
Yes, I said aye.
Sorry. And Ms. Jasinski.
Aye.
Votes aye. Minutes are approved. The expenditure ledgers are in the package. There's been no spending, so I would like to move on to item 4A, since we are great with the presence of Labor Council, Kate Federoff. You have all received the current working draft of the employee handbook. What I'd like to do today is ignore the formatting and typos and that sort of thing. We know there's still a fair amount of work to be done on that, and focus on the content of the document. It's certainly not final yet, but we're getting close, I hope. And Kate, I'll turn it over to you if you want to add anything before we open it up for discussion.
No, I mean, I think you covered it, Barry. What we're trying to do here is make this very Southborough specific, and make sure that the benefits are matching everything in the SAP. What we opted to do, per your last meeting, is keep much of the material on benefits in the SAP, but still make this a one-stop shop so that all of those benefits are reflected in the employee handbook, so employees don't have to go to various spots. And then we put in some, and I hate to use the word boilerplate language, but boilerplate legalese to provide protections for the town, et cetera, et cetera.
And I should add that while it's not in the copies that you have, it's the intention that there will be an appendices to this document that will set out in full a number of the policies that are too lengthy to be contained in this. For example, the full FMLA policy there would be a hyperlink in the digital copy to that, as well as a number of others. But for now, we're just focusing on what's in the document itself. So with that, John and I have spent plenty of time talking to Kate about this, so I'd like to open it up to others who have thoughts about really anything about the content of the handbook.
Barry, maybe I'll go back to my the question I had in the last meeting of where you were looking for guidance, right? To go back to the team here is, in Kate's opinion, does this strike the right balance between what should be in an SAP that's voted on at town meeting on an annual basis versus items that need to be flexible and in policy, such that the town administrator with as needed consultation with the personnel board can adjust throughout the year? Like, are there any items, I guess, Kate, like that you're on the fence about or have seen communities do each way? We're just kind of looking for your broader municipal experience of the right balance to strike given the direction you were given from Barry and John.
Yeah, I mean, Listen, part of it is policy and part of it is understanding what your community is looking for. So the benefits, for example, let's talk about, we had initially thought, well, maybe we'll take out vacation and those kinds of benefits, personal days, things like that, which town meeting tends not to opine on, just for convenience, because typically town meeting doesn't care to weigh in on those matters and leaves it to the management team. That said, there's no real legal reason to force that to be more nimble and reside only in a policy. So I'm perfectly comfortable with how we've removed some of those things which do need to be very flexible, and we have to be nimble when dealing with, because they're tied to a legal requirement. So I'm happy for both benefits to reside in both the SAP and the personnel policy. We just have to be mindful that whenever we make a change, it has to be changed in both, because otherwise then that leads to confusion. So just be cognizant of that. And of course we can be. So that's it.
So why would we have it in both? Like, why wouldn't we just pick where it should be? Because theoretically, if you adjust the policy in the middle of the year, but yet it's inconsistent in the SAP, you obviously aren't going to just magically call a town meeting. So why don't we just make a decision, right? Like, of what it should, I believe it should be in one spot or the other. We can talk about where it belongs in a second, but I think that's going to be massively confusing to have it in both places.
Yeah, so to be clear, if you want to adjust the vacation policy, for example, mid-year, and it's sitting in both the policy and the bylaw, you cannot make the change to the policy and have it be binding until the bylaws change. So the bylaw always has to come first, right? Because when we talk about the force of the legal strength of each type of thing, of course, you have state law, which would supersede bylaw if it were conflicting. Bylaws will supersede a policy if conflicting. So if you wanted to do that mid-year, you couldn't until you made the change in the bylaw, and then you adjust the policy to reflect the bylaw. Does that make sense, Jason?
It certainly makes sense, and I think we're definitely saying the same thing.
Yeah.
So Barry and John, who have been looking at this more, are you proposing vacation to be in both, or are you just proposing it to be in one or the other at this point?
Well, so I thought we spent a lot of time talking about this. So our original position, and my original position, was we're going to take out essentially all of the benefits from the SAP and just have them in the handbook. But for a lot of reasons, including sort of the disconnect between what the town manager bylaw says and what the SAP says, I changed my view, and I thought that we shouldn't be doing that. And because of the point John has made throughout, that there was really very little that we would be taking out, that we would have a need to change sort of midstream before the end of the fiscal year. So I thought at the last meeting, we had sort of come to the conclusion that, okay, we're going to leave pretty much everything in the SAP, keeping in mind that the handbook is a guide for employees. It's just sort of laying out all of these policies in one place, but the official document that we have control over continues to be the SAP. So I thought, and that certainly led John and I in our most recent meetings with Kate to say, okay, let's just copy what's in the SAP in the handbook itself. I think that was my understanding anyway.
So your intention is basically that the handbook will never be updated for those particular items unless town meeting takes action to change something.
Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
So my only question, I completely agree, that's where we were as of the end of the last meeting. I was just confused, like reading it in here, because I was questioning why does it have to be in the handbook, but I get why you've done it, and don't have any objection to that. Is Mark, as the town administrator, comfortable that he still has flexibility with this continued approach, especially given, I mean, right, like we have multiple recruitments now from a personnel perspective. And I just want to make sure that he is comfortable based on obviously the bylaw governs his position as well as the SAP, that he has enough flexibility, or would he rather us deal with giving him more flexibility if needed through potential SAP revisions for this coming town meeting?
So in terms of the handbook, Jason, I don't think the handbook gives, reduces or increases any of
I
the
agree.
flexibility that I have. And I don't want to muddy the water of the handbook with what you just asked, because that can open a whole other avenue in terms of, we do have 5 positions that are open right now that we're trying to fill. And, granted, while the personnel board has tried to give us additional flexibility, it may not prove sufficient, for us trying to be able to get in the candidates and the quality of candidates that we're looking for to fill these positions. But I think that's a separate discussion. And happy to, once we get past this issue with the handbook, happy to engage, in that conversation as to, whether there be a willingness to try to get a little more flexibility on some of these hiring practices.
And just to add to that, it's my expectation that starting next month, we'll be thinking about changes to the SAP that we want to make for town meeting, and we can certainly look at those types of things at that point.
So I guess I completely agree with everything that's just been said, and I don't want to muddy the waters. I'm comfortable with the general concept of how we're proceeding still here on the handbook, but would ask that we have a discussion as we start to think about SAP changes of, again, what do we need to do to create flexibility for hiring, and just give some leeway. And that in one potential item I'm just throwing out there now so that no one's surprised later is whether we need to specifically revisit the ability to change and give more flexibility in the middle of the year. But that's, again, something we have to deal with the SAP first, then we can come back to the handbook. So I think we should keep going with the handbook as planned, but I just don't want there to be confusion when this comes back up when we're talking about the SAP at a later date.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? John?
I've gone through this latest document, and there are some questions I have for Kate, but we can handle that on the committee basis.
Yeah, we'll have another meeting, at least
Yeah.
one more with Kate.
Before we distribute this to other people.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it will be, I would say, at least a couple of months before we have a document that's close to final. All right, if there's no other discussion, I thank Kate, and if you want to introduce Mike
Yes.
to the group.
I'd love to. This is Mike Murray. He, although he recently joined our office, he's not a recent lawyer. He comes with how many years of legal? Oh, you're muted. See, he's not technologically.
Oh, you're gonna make me say it? Oh,
I'm outing you, Mike.
35, 37 years.
So he's a young pup.
I started law school when I was 3.
And we're so thrilled to have him. And he helped he jumped right into the middle of this after Alex left, I know you all had been working with him and really dove in and put a lot of the legal disclaimers that we need in the policy, and has been a real help. So you'll be seeing his face more frequently.
Well, welcome to the team. And I did notice in going through the document, you obviously put a lot of work in with Vanessa and added
Yes.
things since we saw it last. So thank you for that. And we look forward to working with you as we move forward.
Great, thank you very much. Looking forward to it as well.
And thank you both for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barry. And thank you all for taking us out of order. We really appreciate it.
Okay. Have a good day.
You too. Bye now,
Take
guys.
care. Bye-bye now.
Bye, Kate. Okay, moving back to the agenda to 3A, the new hire resignation report. Vanessa?
Sure. This is primarily a resignation report today. Good news for some people. Heidi Sabelli recently retired as our assistant town accountant, so that's an exciting transition for her. We are hoping to hear back today on a final recommendation for assistant town accountant. And we're also in the process of interviews in a number of other departments. Ron Fraser from our facilities department also moved on, as did Julianne Laney, who had another exciting opportunity in the building department. So we started actually interviews yesterday in the building department. So we're pretty busy right now. Although it's not in the report, it happened a little bit late. There were a lot of transitions in the last 2 weeks or so. We are unfortunately losing our payroll and benefit coordinator, Kristen Pasicane, who's been a tremendous asset to all of us, especially this board, I think, with all the data she helped pull together. She has another exciting opportunity in another community, promotion she was recruited for. So we posted that job yesterday. So spread the word.
Okay, that is obviously a tremendous loss for the town and for this board. She's been a wonderful asset to me, I know, and I know others on the board have taken advantage of her skills. So sorry to hear that, but I'm glad that it seems like a good opportunity for her, and wish her nothing but the best. There are no other.
Barry, can I ask a
comments?
question on that?
Sure. Sure. Jason.
Can Vanessa or Mark walk us through the exit interview process, not necessarily for retirement, but for the resignations?
Sure, we do not currently have a formal exit interview process. That's, one thing we talked about chatting with Labor Council as we're working through this handbook. So, right now we do not have a formal exit interview.
So I would like to see one as soon as possible, and recommend that it include a member of the personnel board if it's a personnel board employee.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to 4B, salary good implementation analysis. We started a discussion about this last month. And in the course of that, Jason had some ideas, and I know he has been working with Brian between meetings, and they have produced the document that is at page number 61. So Jason, why don't I turn over to you to run through this?
Sure. Thanks, Barry. And first and foremost, thanks to Brian for his help on this, and talking through and sanity checking some of my rationale. As you all know, at the last meeting, when we started to talk about this, I had raised, my main objective here was that this not become a situation where employees are being treated differently, in that there is one uniform equation that we could use to apply and come to a fair and reasonable outcome, fully realizing that there certainly would be a few winners, a few losers, to the tune of some amount of money. But for the most part, that individuals would be net neutral by trying to adopt the salary grid. So what I did on a piece of paper before actually working with Brian, and Brian did all the math, I kind of outlined a theory and said, let's see how this works out. Was as everyone knows, we all agreed very early on last year on a range, for each salary grade. We adopted a low, we adopted a high, and town meeting adopted that recommendation. What we didn't get to was implementing the grid, which I think we were all in favor of, but we just didn't know how to implement it, so we didn't implement it, right? But we were all in favor of the concept, we were all in favor of having steps, and we were all in favor of having 2% increments to get to from the low to the high of each salary grade. So to me, I thought using FY24 salaries, which is the current fiscal year we're in, and the grid, had we implemented it last year, knowing that the grid already had the ranges that have been adopted by town meeting, was the right place to start. And what I asked Brian to do was, instead of working in 2% increments, make it such that no one would benefit or be set less than plus or minus 1%, right? So 1% on a $100,000 salary, realizing that that's really not many of our employees, if any, in this situation, is $1,000. So really trying to level set the playing field so that this was about as fair as possible, realizing that there's never going to be a perfect outcome and you're going to have 100% seal of approval. So what Brian did was he took everyone's FY24 rate and tried to map them to the closest grid point on the grid that we were working with last year that uses the adopted ranges of town meeting. And if someone was in between grids, they went up. If they were on the higher 1% and they went down, again, this is just from a grid mapping perspective. This is, no one's losing any money here in terms of current pay or anything like that. This is just to try to right size them on the grid so that in any instance, before we talk about COLA, before we talk about step increases for next year, just to implement the grid, each individual employee either is seeing zero impact, the worst case impact of 1%, or the plus or minus. So that's what we did. And then what Brian did is, you can kind of see this with the 103% here, is said, if then the step increases in combination with our COLA increase was 3%, where everyone would end up. And you'll see that the range is most employees are at a 3% increase in that instance, but some fall as low as like 2.1, and some go as high as 4. And to me, again, without looking at any one individual employee, position, etc., because again, I just outlined the theory. I didn't know where the math was going to lead us. This to me seems like the fairest way to adopt the grid, which then lets us focus on what do we think the appropriate pay increase should be for individuals going into FY25, which would be largely COLA driven, and almost everyone, not everyone, would get a step increase as well, which we've already agreed is 2%. So then it comes down to the COLA decision. So there's a lot going on. We can certainly use examples if someone needs to use an example, but that was the overall premise. And again, I know I said this last meeting, and I don't know if it was misconstrued. I don't really care what the number is at the bottom of the page. I cared about, could I explain to any one employee that I'm not like shifting salary so much to one person or not giving enough to someone else. And when I looked at where we were with some of the other examples in the last package from the last meeting, we had some people that were a penny higher than where they would have fallen on the grid, and we're getting an automatic 2% bump just for that. I just couldn't justify someone getting 2% and most other people getting 0. just for an implementation of a policy driven. So that's where I'm personally at. Obviously, the math is in front of you. And I just thought it was a fair way. I certainly am open to feedback. And I know there's obviously other examples that Barry and Brian have worked through, but this is the one where I am at this point.
Okay, and thank you, and Brian, for the time and energy you put in this. It's very helpful and illuminating, and starting with the caveat that I always start with, that I'm not a numbers person. But whatever percentage increase we were to do with the grid, am I not correct that some people are under this scenario would get less than that?
Yeah, that's correct. There are some, not many, but you can see them. I think they're marked with X's. There are some, if we did a 3% raise, there are some that could only see 2. And if that's a concern, I'm just going to throw it out here now, is you could do some sort of one-time, bonus to get them up to the minute, like to if we say we want everyone to at least see a 3% going into next year, and you agree with this approach, you could do a one-time bonus for anyone with an X up to the amount that's in the cost to get on FY24 draft grid to neutralize and get everyone back to 3%, if that was a concern.
Okay, and that would be a concern for me, at least, that if we're going to agree that a certain amount is necessary to treat everyone fairly, that everyone should get at least that amount. And if some people get slightly more, I think whatever system we adopt, we're never going to get everybody getting exactly the same amount. I guess what I'm struggling with, and again, maybe that's the way to go. We do that and just make adjustments. But if we do that, it wipes out my next concern. But my next is that under this approach, there still is up to a 2% difference between what people receive, just as there was under our original scenario. Right, that was what we were running into, that we were doing, I guess we did 4%, but some people were getting 6% and some people were getting 4%. And here, with some people getting 4%, some people getting 2%. And what we've done instead of some employees getting 2% more than everyone else, we've cut that down, and we've cut down the cost to the town. But that's, and again, maybe your last point deals with that. That means that there were certain employees who are getting less. So I guess if we can figure out a way where no one gets less than whatever amount we get, and we can implement it that way, I'd be on board, but I want to make sure that everybody gets the least at whatever amount we vote on.
I'm fully on board with you on that. No, sorry, Barry. I think we're on the same page there. I would love to get to a situation where there's, let's just say we agree 3% is what we're targeting. Again, I'm not saying 3% is what I'm targeting, but let's just say, because that's what we did the math with. I would love to get to a situation where we can say with a straight face that employees are getting somewhere between 3 and 4, not 2 and 4, like we currently are showing. And I would advocate we do that through a bonus, not through trying to adjust hourly rates, or we're going to keep dealing with this every single year. Like, let's just pay it out July 1st. Whoever the first person here is on the list, it's $184.55. They get a check on July 1st to make them, quote unquote, whole in their opinion, to get them up to that 3%.
Okay, other thoughts? John, go ahead.
It's my understanding that Jason, it's my understanding that this grid, or what would be the proposed grid, is taking into consideration the results of the Collins report and how we had to adjust different pay grades and different
Yes.
job. So this paper that we have in front of us this morning takes all that includes that.
It does. And it includes what we adopted at town meeting last year in terms of the reclassifications, the minimum range for certain employees, which is why a lot of these folks unfortunately are at a zero impact of going on the grid, because we've got them up to the minimum of their particular grade or step.
Okay. I personally have seen a half a ream of paper between this and between the grid and the handbook and whatnot. And if this grid analysis takes into effect everything that the Collins report suggested to us, and we took their advice and did whatever we voted to do. I'd like to suggest that we don't debate this anymore. It's like beating the dead horse. Let's go ahead and adopt the grid. And I think your suggestion is that alleviates Barry's concerns with those X's, that there's a so-called bonus check or whatever at July 1st, and that evens everybody out, and we're on the grid and we go forward.
I'm just trying to think through, Jason, if we do the bonus thing to bring people up to whatever percentage we talked about. Are you saying that they stay where they are on the grid? We're just giving them a one-time payment, or how would that work?
That's exactly what I'm saying, because I think this is where they should be on the grid. I really strongly believe that. They're just because of when they were hired, how they were hired, what experience they came in, it didn't match up perfectly, obviously, to where we ended up on our grid spot. So yes, this would allow them to get at least a minimum in this example of 3% for FY25. And then going into future years, unless they've hit this top step of their grade, it would also allow them to move at the same exact percentage moving forward as well. It's all in place.
But does it? Because they're still going to be at the lower point in the grid. And so they're not going to be getting, let's say the following year we do 2%. They're not going to be getting 2% increase over what they actually received in FY25. You're only going to get 2% of where they were on the grid, which is a lower number.
If you're using absolute compensation, yes. If you're using pay rates, no.
I'm confused at the difference.
So what this is doing is getting someone to 3%. If we did this bonus concept, it's getting someone to 3% total compensation based on their number of hours for the year. What it's not doing is setting their pay rate 3% higher than the prior year in all instances.
Okay, I'm still thick on this.
Because the bonus check is derived based on their number of hours per week in this example.
I get that, but we don't have any control over what their total compensation is in a year, other than setting what the hourly rate is. Right?
Right. I mean, yeah, you're saying if a department decided to increase or decrease in hours and got that through advisory, select board, in town meeting, yeah, I agree with that. So what I'm saying is we as the personnel board would essentially be getting their pay rate to be even with all other employees moving forward in terms of the increase, which is all that's within our control.
Yeah, so just with round numbers, so we have, let's take a library page because they're simple. They're $15 an hour now. Well, they're not a good example because they're right at the
Do
three.
one of the X's, Barry.
Hmm?
Do one of the X's. Someone that we'd actually give the bonus to, or
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. So, we had someone who's 2.2%, administrative assistant, town clerk's office would get 2.2%. So, while they'd be on the grid at 2379, we would give them an additional 0.8% above that in their hourly rate, right?
Yes. Well, I'm selecting, that's why I'm saying I'm proposing you don't do it in their hourly rate. I'm proposing, that's why I'm saying you just cut a check for 184.55 on day one of the year. So yeah, their rate would only go up 2.2% for that year. But then in following years, it'd go up 3% or whatever the incremental amount is, such that this far right column would always be 3 for all employees moving forward until they've maxed out of their grid placement.
Right, but it's going 3% on a lower base. They're not getting 3% of their, what they actually receive. They're getting 3% of the lower base from the grid.
I agree, but one could argue that so the alternative, Barry, is they would be getting 4% just for going on the grid as opposed to 2.2%. And then you compound that going forward. I'm just trying to get the impact of the grid to be less than 1% is my goal. Realizing that there are some people going to be on the positive side of that 1%. And some people that are not going to see any impact from it.
Yeah, I mean, this is hard. There's no easy answer to doing this, and I'm not disagreeing with your approach. I'm just trying to think through, are we going to get, if I'm an employee who gets the bonus, who's at 2.1%, how am I going to feel the following year when I don't get the bonus and I don't feel like I'm getting the full, 3% or whatever. Excuse me. That's what I'm.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking the same, something similar. I understand what we're trying to do. I always think about two things. One is, Barry, what you talked about are relative to how employees will feel and will they understand it, not just this year, but going forward. But then what is the precedent that we're setting as a board with these types of adjustments or bonuses? And so I understand what we're trying to do. I'm just not sure that, I just wonder if we look, 2 years, 3 years out, will this keep people competitive and in the right place on the grid if we're not actually changing their pay rates? So, but I understand we're trying to get them on the grid. I understand, Jason, sort of the approach. Just longer term, want to make sure that, well, number one, the employees are understanding how they're paid and how things are adjusted, and that we don't look back and have some concerns or some other issues we have to address.
Oh. Okay, any other comment, discussion from the board? I know we have others, people interested in this discussion who might have some input. Do you want to bring Laurie in? Laurie, go ahead.
Hi, Barry. Thank you. So Jason, I understand what you're talking about, and I agree that, you know, that to bump people up. But on the other hand, if you're talking about a bonus, you're not addressing the going forward issue, because next year we're starting from behind the finish line, behind the starting point again. So would it make sense for anybody who is not at the 3%, just add the money per hour that's needed to get them to the 3%, so that next year we're all starting at the same point? Otherwise, I feel like it's going to compound, and people that are already behind the ball are going to be behind the ball every single year. And again, this is just a one-time thing, so it's not like you have to keep, you know, playing with it every year. So what are your thoughts on, just rather than the bonus, just anybody who's behind, put their hourly rate to what it needs to be to get to the 3%, much like people who had to get to the minimum step range last year?
But how would that fit on the grid? Because if you do that, they're not going to be on a step on the grid.
Well, I think most would be within a step, within the step, because a lot of these you're talking, I mean, some people you're talking pennies, and some people you're talking 50 cents, you know, an hour. I think the people that are getting hit hardest are going to be further behind in a few years if you use the bonus tactic just one time, because there's still, it's like you're catching everybody up the first year, but then the next year, theoretically, the people that were already behind the starting line are again starting behind that starting point. So I don't know that
But
there's an easy solution.
No, I mean, look, we've all, you know, I know John wants to move on from this, and I think we all do, but at the same time, we're trying to strike a really impartial balance. And if there was an easy answer, we'd be done with this already, right? So Lori, I think my rationale behind the bonus, but while agreeing fully with what you're saying, is then in that situation, the employee would never in an exact step on the grade always be between steps, and you'd be like step 8.5 as opposed to step 8 or step 9, and it just never would, the math would never work out. I also will throw this out there just for consideration is, and Barry, with your permission, given I think you have on the agenda next of starting to set guidance for next year. I mean, my inclination at this point, based on the COLA information, is, right, are you okay if I go here and commingle these topics? Because I think they're somewhat related.
You go ahead.
The COLA data clearly indicates in and around 3% for the year, right? In terms of, and we all know that most employees, I think it's like, there's a couple maybe that are maxed out on the grid. We'll see a 2% if we adopt it just automatically because they're moving from one step to another. So I'm inclined to be closer to 105, not 103 on the schedule, which again, I think, you know, that sets precedent. That gets you, not that we have to do that the next year as well, but if most people are seeing close to a 5% increase, I think it softens some of this discussion around bonus versus not. The other solution we could do, which I think will be met with us, is if you just automatically go to the next, that because someone's a penny higher, they automatically get to the next one. I just don't see that as being fair either, and potentially inflating a position beyond where it should be, which I know there's arguments pros and cons for that, but I just, again, trying to strike a balance. So I just wanted to show where I'm kind of leaning on that other step. which may hopefully soften some of this noise we have about adopting the grid, which is, there's always gonna be some noise.
Great. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be, I mean, maybe there's a range that you can use that if someone's within a certain, 10 cents or something, that they don't get to the next step. Or in this case, I mean, it is a one-time thing. So on one hand, it is only going to affect a lot of people just this first year, and then everybody's kind of in the same race afterwards. But on the other hand, the other way to look at it is you've got one chance to get everything right the first time, so that everybody is not, you're not again in 5 years looking back and saying, oh geez, but we're slipping behind on the grid again. So I know it's not an easy solution. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I just thought maybe rather than the bonus, you could kind of put everybody a little closer to where they need to be hourly. And then we'd kind of all be on the same page going forward. But thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. Laurie alluded to on the document marked Bates 63, which we looked at the last meeting, sort of addresses what Laurie was mentioning, and that is you could just do a cutoff and say if you're within X 5 cents, 10 cents, whatever of a step, you don't get to go move up to the next step. So that saves you the money and levels the playing field a bit. And you don't have the issues in future years because everyone's at a step. There's no one who loses anything. And depending where you set that, it has some obviously cost implications for the town. And Mark, maybe it would be helpful to have your sort of input on this.
I was just chatting with Mr. Valentine back there during the discussion. So obviously the reason for putting the grid into the SAP is to provide a level of certainty and equity. Okay, so employees will go up by steps, through the grid on an annual basis. The board can entertain a COLA each year, and that's really what you're deciding on is going to be, any COLAs. It's not going to be clean putting the grid back in place. I think we know that. You've had employees that for many years in the SAP have gone between min to max, and there's been no steps. There's been not a lot of guidance. It's been wherever they ended up, and they just increased on a percentage basis. I think that the way that Mr. Malinowski's looked at it is, he wanted to keep everybody down below a 1% increase. You can go the other way and move people up to the next step, and then you're looking at a 4% increase. So it's 6 one, half dozen of the other. But Brian had just said to me, okay, well, if you say the cutoff is if you're within 10 cents, then you don't move. Well, what about the people that are 11 or 12, right? So it's really arbitrary. I think, the board is going to have to decide. You're not going to make everybody happy, and there's not going to be, a unified level of support to do this. I think the overarching theme is supported well. I just think that, there's not going to be, there is no clean way to do it where everybody is equal. There's going to be minor differences the first year. I think everybody understood that. And I can understand people advocating to try to make it higher. But the board's got to be comfortable with what you want to do. There is no clean solution.
Whatever.
Yeah, John.
If I interpret what you're saying is, we keep manipulating this and trying to figure it out. I personally feel we're better off to just adopt this now the way it is.
Yeah.
And get on with it, because otherwise you'll be sitting in that same chair with a different piece of paper with different figures on it. And But let's get on with
So
it.
you can go the other direction. You can go the other way and say, we're just gonna move people up to the next highest step. And you're gonna increase the overall cost for town meeting. And then does that become an issue in terms of trying to sell it? Financially, we're still in the infancy of where we think we may be in terms of budget and everything, but every year seems to be fairly restrictive in terms of what we can do. So at some point, you'll have to decide where it is that you feel you're most comfortable being and defensible position. But again, the first year is not clean to put everybody back when there's been a lack of a structure, within the grid. There's been no grid. So within the ranges, there's been no structure. You're now implementing a grid over the ranges. And so there's going to be some level of inequity. You've got to figure out where you're comfortable.
I just want to remind everyone of one point that started this whole grid conversation with the Collins Center. I guess it was well over a year ago, right? By putting a grid in place, we are essentially guaranteeing employees that aren't at top step a minimum of a 2% increase every year based on their experience. We could just say, no, we're going to keep going in these ranges and only adopt a COLA moving forward. But I think we need to also remember what the main purpose here is this is an incredibly pro-employee policy we're trying to implement. It just comes with a huge nuance of implementation. But I think, again, 99 out of 100 employees, and I realize we don't have 100 SAP employees, are going to benefit from this. Like, it's a huge win for the employees, and I think it's the right answer for the employees too, especially given the tenure that we have with some of these employees and recognizing them for all that expertise they bring to the town.
Okay. I mean, I'm trying to think through what sort of, in addition to what you said, Jason, what goals that I have in terms of figuring out a system. And one is, as I said, that I would want a system where no one gets less than whatever amount we should vote for next year. Second would be, once we put the grid in place and people are placed on the grid, we never have to deal with it again. In other words, everybody is just going to move along as they're supposed to. And third is to do this in a way that's fair to employees, but minimizes the financial impact on the town. So those are sort of the three things I'm trying to manage in my own head. And I guess fourth, not to have a system that is, at least in its initial implementation, so complicated that we need a 2-page explanation about what's happening, why people are getting placed where they are. I would like it to be as transparent. Okay, I see. That makes sense. This is where I go. So that, and I suspect we all share those sort of goals in doing this. For me, again, just me personally, and again, recognizing that whatever we do, it impacts different people differently and has a large element of arbitrariness in it. My preference would be just to set a number cutoff, a cents per hour cutoff, and say, if you're below that, and one of the advantages, I think, is because we don't know, we haven't voted on what the number is going to be. We don't know what individuals are going to be impacted how. We're just picking whatever that number is, and however it falls, it falls. And that way, we get people on the grid going forward, we're fine. We've saved the town a little bit of money, not a huge amount, a little bit of money. So that's where I come out, but I recognize there's no right answer here and everybody could feel completely differently.
Well, there might not be any right answer, but we gotta have an answer.
We do,
Barry?
we do.
Barry,
Yeah, go
I would
ahead.
be inclined to go with Jason's thought process on this, do the bonus check July 1st, and let's see where we land and where people are after doing this for a year. And we can always go back and take a look at this again, but we're just beating this and beating it. And we're not coming up with a better answer than that. I mean, we can guess, well, you know, let's do this cutoff or this cutoff. Why don't we just go with what we have in front of us with Jason's idea and let's give it a shot. I mean, we're trying to do right by the employees and they understand that. So I just think Jason, at this point, I'm inclined to go with Jason's thought with the bonus July 1st. You know, this one person will get a check for $184. There'll be several others and see what happens. That's just my opinion on this.
The other thing to consider is that after, and Dorian had just said, you know, we can take a look next year and see if we need to revisit, but after the first year, you have the grid in place and people will move, as Jason had said, you're going to move from step to step. Everyone inherently, unless there are issues, will get a 2% increase every year. The board then has the ability to make additional adjustments on top of that in terms of a COLA. So any inequities and everything, you have the ability to address through that COLA.
But my point is that there are employees who are not going to get 2%. They're going to get less than 2%.
But yes,
And that's the problem I have.
I
That,
see that.
hmm?
I don't see that.
Well, because if you don't, so what we're saying is someone who's 0.8% below their step, they're going to be at a step that's 0.8% below what their actual salary is on the grid. But we're going to give them a bonus that first year to make up that 0.8%. The next year when they move up, they're still that 0.8% behind. So when we give when everybody gets 2%, they don't get 2% because they've started 0.8 behind. They're getting 1.2%. And I have a problem with that. And I think, and if I'm an employee and everybody's getting 2%, I'm getting 1.2, I would have a problem with that. So that's where I struggle.
But I think what I heard Mark say was, at that point, when that happens, we have the ability to adjust.
But I don't think Mark was talking about doing an individual adjustment.
you do, but that doesn't correct Barry's. I mean, so, right, you're kind of on the fence as to, do you do it the way that has been presented, which has that level of inequity, or do you, I guess, overcorrect that inequity by going to the next step? Which for some will correct the inequity, and for some it will more than correct, it will add on to whatever they would be getting in addition to.
Right, it's a matter of how you want to err, essentially. Do you want to err
Right.
in favor of making sure everybody gets X and some people get more and it costs the town more?
Right.
Or do you want to do it in a different way where some
Right.
people get
So
less?
Jason looked at it and said, I want to keep, by putting people on the grid, I want to limit the impact of that to this. You know, to this amount and everything. And if you want to look at the other direction and say, everyone, once you place them on the grid, needs to at least get 2%, 2.5%, whatever the percentage is you set. Then you can place the people there and then see what that, so that might be better than, rather than saying 10 cents, 5 cents, or 15 cents. If you determine that you want the increase for each person to be, for each employee to be at least X. And then let Brian run the numbers and can figure out where that drops everybody on the grid and what the total is for that. That might be a better approach than looking at the penny.
I don't think you can use the penny idea because obviously a penny to some employees is a lot different than a penny to another employee based on what. You can't, I don't think you can use absolute dollars as your threshold. I would, I mean, right, like Barry, if we want to adopt if we want to try to resolve and eliminate some X's, so to say, from the approaches currently on the table, the one item I could recommend is we lower the threshold, like, and give Brian different guidance, slightly different guidance, very slightly different. It's going to require another spreadsheet, which is going to require another meeting, but right, in the interest of moving this forward, you could say to the extent that it's 0.5%, not 1%, move them up. So does that make sense? It's going to greatly diminish your population.
It doesn't. I probably have to see it just conceptually. But yeah, I mean, you understand the problem, what I'm struggling with. And I'm willing, I'm interested in finding a way to do it that doesn't have that effect. And if we can figure some way out that doesn't have that effect, I'm 100% behind it. So.
I mean, Brian, does Brian understand what I'm suggesting? Like,
Brian,
I think it's good.
why don't you come on?
Bring your lunch.
Jason was suggesting a slightly different approach. Why don't you run through it again, Jason?
I was just saying, Brian, if if you think about where we started with this, right? We were looking at the individuals that were getting 1.9% increase, right? Just because they were a penny higher than the step that they were going to get assigned to. So we kind of set that in between of 1%. Like, what if we set it as anyone that's I guess the easiest way, anyone that's 1.5% or less will automatically go up. Anyone that's 0.5% or less will basically go to the lower level.
We could do that, sure. Yeah,
I just think the size of the dollars we're going to be talking about, Barry, well, every penny, every dollar is really important to both those that are paying it as taxpayers and those that are earning it as employees. I just think it's going to become hopefully more of a splitting hairs exercise. Again, I'm saying that very delicately, but I just cannot move someone up 1.9% because they were a penny higher. That was the problem I was trying to solve, and that's why I went to the midpoint. But I'm happy to go higher than the midpoint and be more employee friendly to reduce the number of X's on here.
Are you,
you're still gonna have the situation of, you're just not gonna make everyone happy, because you're still gonna
No,
have
you
that cutoff
never
where
are.
someone's gonna say, I missed it by a penny, that's not fair. And you're just.
Yeah.
but, sure, we could do that. I mean, maybe that's the fairest way.
But, and just so I'm clear, and again, I'm better when I see things on paper, but we're still gonna have the same situation, albeit smaller.
Yes.
Right. I mean, we could see how much smaller. Maybe it's really small and we're just, I don't know.
are you
I don't
using
know.
0.5? Are you using 0.5%? Is that what you just said?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that affects 16. If you're gonna make a change, it affects 16 people or positions.
That's pretty good.
There's not many left. Let's see.
We could certainly run that and then run Jason's. If you're still interested in it, Jason's original thought of giving the one-time bonus. That's pretty easy to figure out, unless you.
That we
guys just-
can see, right, already, pretty
You
much.
should pretty much see it, but we
Yeah.
can run it as an option, but I mean, unless it's dead, but it's up to you.
Okay, why don't we do that? And I know this won't make John happy, but we'll put this off.
One more meeting.
One more meeting where I just think we want to get this as right as we can. And it's worth putting in the time to do it. So let's do that. Can we, when we redo it, can we take off the 1, 2, 3, the first 3 columns, actually the first 4 columns? We don't need those. And I just soon do this in a way that we have no idea what employees we're talking about. Obviously, none of us are looking at this and saying, we want to help, but just the same, I just make it as neutral as we can do it. All right, does that make sense to everybody in terms of moving forward? Or anybody have any other comment?
What are we making sense? What are we doing?
Brian is going to go back and create yet another document for us to look at, where he's going to change the parameters somewhat with the expectation we're going to reduce the number of employees who are negatively impacted to a very minimal amount. That's the hope. Anyway,
That's the whole.
And I will reiterate, I think the math there is going to be far more complicated to understand and explain. And I would rather deal with this by doing across the board extra potentially 1% on the COLA, which builds in permanency to the pay increases and sends a much stronger message to what we think from an employee perspective, and hopefully mitigate some of this quote unquote noise. That's how I want to deal with it. But I think we all want to be fair. So I look forward to resolving this at the next meeting.
I think we all do. Any other comments on this? Dorian, did you?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Jason, for putting that together. I think we have advanced, although not resolved, the discussion. Okay, moving on to FY25 compensation. We've had this in the packet, but not really started a discussion on it. This packet has new CPI information, as well as for the first time at page 68, some information that Vanessa's started to get from towns on what they are doing. Can we find out, Vanessa, if any of these towns are using grids so that what they're doing here is moving their grid up 3%, or what they're doing? Because that would put the numbers in a little better context for me. Are employees getting 3% plus they're moving up? What's happening there? That would be helpful. Is there any discussion about this at this point? Recognizing we'll continue to get more information from other towns, and obviously Jason has broached the subject of what we might be thinking about for next year. Certainly there's adequate data, and what we're already seeing that would, in my mind, suggest I wouldn't do anything less than 3%, but we certainly could think about something higher if we thought the numbers supported it. But with that said, I'm happy to let anyone else jump in. It was not my expectation that we'd make a decision on this at this meeting, but I just wanted to make sure we are focusing on this because we are going to have to make some kind of decision sooner rather than later. Any discussion?
What's the deadline for our final offer, so to speak?
Well, with the
When?
next meeting,
Oh,
I'm hearing. Okay. Is there any other information people would like to see that would assist them in making decisions, so we make sure we have everything we need for next meeting? Okay. All right. While we're talking about next meeting, I would like everyone to be thinking about amendments they'd like to see. We mentioned it at the outset to the SAP. We need to start that process. And also, I hope, and Vanessa will correct me if I'm wrong, that we will start to see some revised job descriptions at the next meeting. I know the town administrator's office has done a lot of work on this, but in order for us to see it, they need to go through approval by the employee, by the manager, and by the relevant board before it gets to us. So that process takes some time. But should we expect to see something by the October meeting?
Melanie sent out, the majority of those job descriptions this week to get employees and department heads, reviewing those and giving them to their appointing authority. I know Mark has a large pile to look through himself, so it's well in process.
Okay, so we will see something next month. That's what I'm hearing. Okay, thank you. Is there any other business come before the board? Is there any public comment? Yes, please come up to the. I'm gonna go here.
Yeah. Good morning.
This isn't bad.
Yeah. I'm Carla McCullough, the town accountant. I haven't gone to a personnel board meeting, but I would like to speak to the section 11 with regard to vacation for new employees. So I have a vacancy in my office, and the way that this is structured currently, I really feel it kind of hamstrings us from getting experienced employees. We had a few people from other municipalities that were looking to come, could have slid right into the position, but with the vacation that we were offering and being at 3 weeks for, another 5 years after, it wasn't something that they were interested in. So I do feel like the way that it's structured is putting us at a little bit of a disadvantage. I don't know the answer. I'm not sure how to fix it. It's just a tough job market out there. We're competing with the private companies that can offer, bonuses, and they have, a nice package of PTO, but trying to get a person from another town here, it's hard to offer them something that they don't already have. They already have, 14 holidays, 13 or 14 holidays, and maybe a Friday afternoon off. So I can just tell you from my experience, we have lost out on good potential candidates to come work here based on this. And I just ask that you just think about how we could restructure that.
Okay, thank you. And we really can't have a discussion on it because it's not on the agenda.
Exactly. This is just.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just want to be clear. You're saying that the 3 weeks that you can offer is not sufficient?
Right, and being
Okay.
at that 3 weeks for 5 years. Some people are willing to take a little cut in vacation for a different opportunity, but being stuck at that for the next 5 years, people are not interested.
So Carla, is your point that the 5 years is the issue, or the 3 weeks isn't enough to recruit a qualified, experienced person in local government somewhere else?
It could be both. I mean, what we were able to put together was the 3 weeks and 5 years after 3 weeks. And, maybe some people would have taken a step back and said, okay, I'll do that for the 2 years, but the 3 weeks is a hardship too, because
some people are having 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and, not to be able to match that is tough. I get the 5-week thing, and again, some people are willing to take, like myself, I took a step back in vacation for a good opportunity. And, but some people are not in that position with, young children or whatever, they need their time. Time is important to people.
Okay. I just, because we really shouldn't be having a discussion because it's not on the agenda, but we will be talking about SAP amendments going forward and useful information for us to have. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, we felt it was important because now we are actually seeing some actual losses that we've passed on people. And I think that 1 week would make a big difference. I think 2 weeks is untenable. You can't, personally, being able to go up to 5 weeks might be a little hard to sell, but that 1 week may make a big difference. Or if you guys have other ideas, but just to put it on your.
That's right. Yeah,
It's just tough out there. It's tough out there, really. It's a seller's market. The people that are coming, they have a lot of other options, I guess, or they're not willing to,
Okay, you can ask a question. You can ask a question.
Is it the stipulation that you have to wait to go up to the next step? And what it would be to 4 weeks, because you have to wait, you have to be here 5 years.
5 years.
Yes, yeah.
Is that the
Yeah.
problem? One of the problems?
That's one of the problems.
One of the problems.
Yes, yeah. And again, I don't know the answer.
Yeah, we don't have the answer.
That you think about it.
Throw that in.
We appreciate it. That's why we get the big bucks. Well, thank you for bringing that to our attention. Any other public comment? Board calendar, our next meeting is October 18th at 9 a.m. I think we'll be meeting at the Public Safety Building. And the meeting after that would be November 8th. Right.
Yeah.
Does that work, November 8th work for everyone? Or put differently, is there anyone who can't make it on November 8th?
I would be via Zoom.
We would love to have you here in person, but
I'd
we'll
have to
take
be
you
Zoom,
any way we can.
but I will be here for October 18th in person. Aren't you lucky?
I will look forward to it. So we're good for November 8th?
Yeah.
Okay, great. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, Mr. Thorburn,
Aye.
Mr. Dinsky,
Aye.
Ms. Jones Johnson,
Bye.
Mr. Malinowski.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.